What happened in Ferguson set people ablaze around this country, particularly this generation, because they, unlike ever before, had to witness their mortality. Well, I'm Willis Johnson. I am by day a pastor of a church in Ferguson, Missouri, the Wellspring Church. I also teach and instruct at some area seminaries, and just another guy.
Just another guy. Just another guy that happened to be either in the right place or the wrong place when Michael Brown was shot. That shooting happened just jogging distance from your parish.
Yeah. The crazy thing about it, Matt, real quick, is that that happened early in the afternoon on August 9th, on a Saturday. And most people became aware of that immediately through social media. I remember getting buzzed, whether through Facebook or through some text messages, and unfortunately didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. You know, kind of a Sabbath day or a day to be with my family, but also more importantly, those types of things happen so often that I think we sometimes become numb. It's not unusual to have a shooting. It's not unusual to have a police-involved shooting. It's not even unusual for there to be tragedy associated with that kind of occurrence. But the magnitude of it being immediately in our space, and then later coming home into our community, and what transpired drew me, not as a practitioner or a priest, but just because as somebody lives, and I heard the noise, and once was there, knew that this was more than just one young person. This was a group of young people who I think had realized their own mortality.
You said that the first time that you were in the streets with protesters was in front of the police station where students had gathered. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Well, on that night, August 9th, throughout the day, most of the young people had been stationed at Canfield. That's why they were there. They lived in that community. Obviously, many may know the account that officers left the young man lying in the street for much of the time, initially uncovered, and let no one touch him, not even let his own family come near him. Eventually, he was covered, but even then, he was not removed. And so, you're talking about 3 or 4 hours minimum for some of these young people, who then took their grievance and their frustration from West Florissant over to the police station municipality, which is on South Florissant of Ferguson. And that's a half a block from my church and my house, bookend. And so I heard the noise, I heard the hollering, and went out initially just to see what was happening. And of course, when I did, I told my wife, I'll be back. You know, I went out. And I didn't go out there to pray with anybody. I didn't do anything that, you know, you learn in chaplaincy school, or it was literally like, what's going on? Because this had now become something significant. And the young people were like, we're not leaving until we talk to somebody. And I was like, they not trying to talk to y'all. This place is on lockdown. They're like, we're not leaving. And so I said, I think I might be able to help at least see if someone will come out, or if you can have someone go and talk. But even doing that was not with the missional intent. It was just, I live here. I'm like, I know what the curfew is. I know this place. And this is probably not the best way to handle things. I'll be honest, my response to them was not to stop them or curtail anything. But in hindsight, I think about how, you know, we all have become conditioned, even at a Ferguson, you know, that how things are just how they are. And I don't think that's any different from the civil rights era, or errors before that.
You've been working with this young man who was protesting and got arrested, and he's still in jail. How do you walk that line between civil disobedience and trying to get people's attention and trying to shake up the system so that it changes, versus sort of playing into that trap?
I got pictured with a young man who was part of a very large early on protests and responses that kind of made me look like I was doing something when I was actually responding to him like I would my own son, which was basically, don't do what they want you to do. Let's not give in to what is desired, which is an excuse to be able to then act upon in ways that are usually damning and dangerous for black males. That's what I said to him. And I said, whatever you need to do, whatever you need to say, you say it and do it to me, because I'm not going to arrest you. I'm not going to shoot one of these guns at you. That was the encounter. It may sound real crass, but my dad told me one time, he said, the best way to help the poor is not to become it. Now, that's not going to go over well, I'm sure, with some of your audience. But the idea was, I feel that way about the judicial system. I make sure I try my darndest not to give somebody an excuse to put handcuffs on me and lock me up. They don't need much of an excuse, but I think sometimes that's the challenge of vulnerable populations. And unfortunately, we've had people who have succumbed to that. And so now we have an additional fight that we have to fight.
There's a lot of young black men in prison.
Yeah.
This is data. This isn't a debate. This
No.
is just the way it is. What's happening? Why is that, from your perspective?
Oh, well, I believe it's very intentional. I mean, I think it's a continuum of what, much of this country's historical, and philosophical and economic precedents have put into motion, and they had and have created institutions that help to memorialize, justify, and monetize on those historical precedents, which is that we dehumanize one another, that we see particularly black and brown bodies and indigenous people, First Nationers, as well as those of the African diaspora, as property, and whether that's from chattel slavery into now, that our economic system is predicated on having free or cheap labor. And to justify that, we have to, again, dehumanize, devalue, emasculate those individuals, so that then now they become elements of what, or cogs in the system. System is by design inhumane, impersonal, and is only about keeping the machine going by any means necessary. And the mass incarceration is one element of that, as we know from work from Michelle Alexander and others. And not only that, his kind of historical and philosophical kind of perspective, what we are doing in terms of funneling people into that reality. If people are forced to find alternative ways to gainfully support themselves, no matter how we feel about what is right or wrong, the reality is that many people in this country, in this world, are in survival mode.
Let's unpack some of that from a libertarian perspective, because I call the criminal justice system, somewhat sarcastically, but it's mostly true, they call it the prison industrial complex. And it's a term that I've stolen and appropriated from Eisenhower's description of the military industrial complex. And it's in large part fed by the criminalization of nonviolent consensual things like drugs. And that one of the reasons we have so many people in prison is because we arrest people for things that aren't crimes, in my mind, as a libertarian.
Like we have historically around black and brown people. And it is definitively clear the difference of how we have looked at crack, marijuana, all those things prior to Colorado, California getting legalized, or Oregon, and now this opioid epidemic. That kind of points to that disparity. Even the Second Amendment is not freely exercised or given, or people of black or brown are given the full autonomy that comes with that amendment. Because possession of firearms or the lack of proper licensing and filing and those kinds of things are severe punishments for people who are black and brown in this country.
The other part of that is, and this would be a classic critique of how we think government works, is that once you create an institution that feeds off of imprisoning people, the incentive, and I don't think it's a private-public thing. I think it's the prison workers union could be just as interested as the corporation that builds new prisons. All of those interests come together to say, you know what, we need more prisons. And one way you get more prisons is by not dealing with the fact that we're putting too many of our kids in prison. And we see that in a lot of things. And I wonder if there isn't some common ground there, because when you talk about the system, I'm thinking about the system too. Like there's a lot of perverse incentives that don't make us safer, that destroy a lot of lives, and I would think that left, right, center, we could actually agree on that, at least in concept.
Yeah.
So upstream of politics, so as a libertarian, there's big L libertarianism, which is a political party, and honestly, I don't have much faith in the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, or the Libertarian Party to solve all these problems. But the philosophy of libertarianism is about, it sounds a lot like what I hear sometimes from very progressive activists. Bottom-up, community-based solutions. We're gonna solve these problems by working face to face and acknowledging our differences and tolerating our differences and finding a couple really big things that we need to solve that keep society together. I think that's what community organizing is. I think that's what grassroots action is all about. I don't think it's about electing somebody, and you may disagree with that. I think politicians sometimes, this will be shocking, sometimes they tell you just what you want to hear. And they may not mean it, but you and I in our communities at the grassroots level could come together and say, you know what, this is a real problem. We're going to do something about it.
I think you're right. We are the strategy and the ultimate solution. The question is, are we going to resist? Are we going to not become the system? There's a place I visited most recently that's pretty popular, had a major issue, and they're really excited because they have a leader in their government who comes out of the protest movement. And I told someone, I said, well, now they're a politician. I have some good friends on Capitol Hill. I mean, I have some mentors on Capitol Hill. I think they're great people, and they are, and they're also politicians. And you can't help but say that, and acknowledge that. I don't think most people know how to either respect that or recognize that once you're in the system, that's a game.
Another way to think about the system is concentrated power. And again, I'm thinking about it in my strange way of thinking about things, and just replacing a politician is you're basically taking power from one person and giving it to another person. And I think power corrupts people. And you mentioned Marvel Comics, but we could mention Lord of the Rings and
Yeah.
and the Precious. Nobody can wear that ring without it fundamentally screwing them up. So I think what we're talking about when we talk about community action is decentralizing power, distributing power, and making sure that everybody has some power, but nobody has access to all the power, because it corrupts whoever is in charge, and they fall into the system because now they benefit from the system by definition. And I think that, to me, democratization and decentralization and people showing up and people being involved and people having conversations and even people protesting, all of that done in the right way decentralizes power and undermines the system.
Yeah.
I think.
It does, and then it doesn't. But I'm intrigued to figure out how do we.
I'm a romantic about the future of this, by the way.
You're talking to a person who deals out hope. I mean, all the time. So I believe that there is not only a possibility, there's not just a probability, but there's a promise that good overcomes evil and light overtakes darkness, and that people of good faith and goodwill do persevere. I just struggle to figure out how, in large scale and in kind of in expedited ways, we have this pressed down and out.
Yeah. Well, let's work on that together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Right on. Thank you.